From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, the White House turns up the pressure as senators clamor for changes to President Trump's big, beautiful bill.
The influence the president is trying to exert to get Republicans to fall in line as Elon Musk blasts the package as an abomination, earning some surprise support from Senate Democrats.
I agree with Elon Musk. If even Elon Musk, who's been part of the whole process and is Trump's buddy, says the bill is bad, you can imagine how bad this bill is.
We'll have more when Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota joins us.
Plus, the developing news from Europe after NATO requested its EU member states to expand their ground-based air defense capabilities in response to a potential Russian threat following that attack from Ukraine deep inside Russia. We'll discuss what it means when former NATO commander General Wesley Clark speaks with us.
We'll also take you to Seoul for a look at the results of South Korea's presidential election and more on what it means for its alliance with the U.S.
And we'll discuss the nuclear power deal signed by Meta today that gives us a look into their AI ambitions as much as 20 years down the road. But we begin tonight on Capitol Hill, where Republican senators are being pressured by the president to vote for his tax bill, with Republican members of the Senate Finance Committee now set to visit the White House tomorrow. This even as Elon Musk expresses very public dissatisfaction. His former boss's big, beautiful bill, posting today on X, quote, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it," unquote. Joining us now live from Capitol Hill, where this is still resonating, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson covering this story for us. Erik, what's the buzz around Elon Musk and what's next in this meeting at the White House?
You know, there is a bit of a sense that Elon Musk prime time in D.C. has passed. He left his position as the head of Doge, has gone back to his business. Some senators were pointing out that Mr. Musk does not get a vote in the U.S. Senate, but he's still influential in the party. And there are four key conservatives, Mike Lee, Rick Scott, Rand Paul, and Ron Johnson, who have said they want deeper spending cuts and have laid out, including today, different objections to the bill, including related to the debt ceiling. This bill would raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, something that needs to happen before August to avoid a payment default. So as Trump is working the phones, his former, top ally, Elon Musk, is out there working against him. It creates an interesting dynamic, to say the least, up here.
Well, and when we consider the work the president is putting in, knowing the Finance Committee members will be meeting with him tomorrow, Erik, do we have a sense of what changes, if any, the president is okay with, or if he's asking senators to not make too many tweaks for the sake of it passing the House a second time?
I think one change we can definitely guarantee the Senate bill will have, I talked to Mike Crapo, the head of the Senate Finance Committee today, is to extend the temporary business tax breaks that are in this package. They were elements of the 2017 bill. They only last 5 years in the House version just for budgetary reason. The Senate is going to use a giant budget gimmick to basically write off $4 trillion in costs, and that gives them more room to add more tax breaks. So I think we can definitely see interest expensing, what's called bonus depreciation, allowing certain investments to be written off more quickly. To be in the bill. But if we go beyond that towards making no tax on tips or no tax on overtime, an extra deduction for senior citizens permanent, then that really adds to the cost of the bill, and then it maybe inflames these deficit hawks further. So we really have to see. I do want to add one thing about Elon Musk. It should be noted that Tesla has come out talking about how the EV tax credit, which is eliminated in this bill, is harmful to their bottom line. So Musk has both deficit concerns, but certainly business-related concerns if this bill were to pass.
An excellent point. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson live on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much. And for more on Elon Musk and the White House's strategy on this bill overall, we turn now to Marc Short, former chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence. He also served as director of legislative affairs during the first Trump administration. Marc, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. When we consider Elon Musk, who just days ago was in the Oval Office for his kind of goodbye party, if you will, of his time spent in government in a formal way, in this administration, now calling the president's what's supposed to be his signature legislative achievement in his second term an abomination. Is this Elon Musk actually saying the quiet part out loud on the real impact this will have on the deficit?
I don't know, Kayleigh. I think it's a little bit rich for a guy who's amassed a fortune on the backs of American taxpayer subsidies for electric vehicles and direct payments from American taxpayers for space companies to allege that the bill has too much pork in it. As Erik just talked about, the Tesla swamp has spent a few $100,000 against this bill, lobbying against it, and in particular the electric vehicle elimination of those subsidies. And so I don't know that it's as much to look at as much as what's in the best interest of Elon Musk in this bill. And so, I mean, yes, it's a very quick departure from where Elon has been in supporting the president so strongly to basically coming out against this bill. But there's a lot of personal interest, I think, here, too.
Well, he's done a gift for Democrats here, it sounds like. This afternoon, the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, had some things to say about it. But let's hear from Democrats themselves, because leaders in both chambers weighed in on this, Marc. Let's listen.
I agree with Elon Musk. Republicans should listen to him, and actually to their former selves, outraged about the national debt. Because it's here, Donald Trump's big, ugly bill is in the Senate.
This is not scare tactics. This is a bill, if enacted, will not result in savings. It will result in an increase in the uninsured.
Before Elon Musk decided to weigh in, the American people understood the deal. In every single poll that has come out.
Having heard your initial reaction to this, Marc, what kind of damage could this do politically when you start making campaign commercials about Elon Musk?
Well, I think those campaign commercials are going to happen. I think you'll already see Democrats, alleging the Medicaid cuts when Republicans are actually advocating that people who have the capacity to work should be doing so to qualify. So I think that it's going to be a politically charged environment regardless. I think Republicans understand that. I think with any bill this big, Joe, you've been around D.C. long enough, it's going to die many deaths. There'll be many obituaries written, and then it will rise from the ashes. And I think that the consequence of a $4.5 trillion tax increase, if they don't get this done, will be sufficient enough that they actually get this across the finish line. But, this is the one major piece of legislation. It's not like there's other competing battles right now. And so all the focus is going to be on this bill. It's going to draw a lot of attention. And I think that, again, you're going to see people express disappointment pieces. But when you have a bill this big, it's not going to be perfect. And again, the question is, how do you put together a coalition that extends the tax relief without the $4.5 trillion tax increase?
Well, and given the size of the bill, Marc, are they trying to rush this too quickly with this July 4th deadline to get it on the president's desk?
I can't say they're trying to rush it too quickly. I frankly think there's concern among some Republicans about the consequence of the economy later in the year with all the trade policy. And I do think they want to get it done before then. But some of these deadlines are just artificial. And I think if they miss the July 4th deadline, it's a self-imposed deadline. And I wouldn't be surprised if it slips, honestly, Kayleigh. I mean, in 2017, you'll recall, we didn't pass tax relief until December 22nd. And so it could take a while. I don't think it necessarily will be by July 4th, but I don't think it's that consequential if it's not. I still think it gets done.
I want you to bring us behind the scenes here, Marc, with your unique perspective, having actually been the liaison between a Trump White House and the Capitol, the shuttling that's going to take place back and forth in the days and weeks ahead, and the phone calls. The president met with 5 senators yesterday, 4 of whom have real reservations about what's going on here. To what extent is he going to direct the negotiations versus John Thune doing his balancing act on Capitol Hill? How's this all unfold?
Well, I think that the president, as you can imagine, is actually less in the details. He just wants the win. And so he'll be just pushing people to actually get it done. And I think the reality is that the president is unique in that he carries such fervent support among the base, and he's willing to use that in primaries. And I think that is something that really, keeps a lot of Republican members in line with what the president's agenda is. I think that the Senate is a little bit hard in the House because the elections are not every 2 years; they're every 6 years, and I think it's just there's a little bit more dynamic there with senators who want to exert their influence over this bill. But again, when we passed in 2017, don't forget, John McCain was ill. We had 51 Republicans. They actually have 53 right now. And so there is a little bit more margin than we actually had in 2017. Again, to Kayleigh's question, I don't think that means it's going to go fast, but I still think it gets done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, in addition to having a little bit more of a margin than the House has the luxury of enjoying, Marc, the Senate has other hurdles, including that of the parliamentarian. How much does that kind of procedural aspect of this, especially for the components of this bill that are not arguably budgetary in nature, going to factor in here as well? And do you expect the majority leader will be abiding by the parliamentarians' rulings as effectively what Republicans are forced to go with?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kayleigh, and I think there should be a little bit more focus on this because when a bill goes through reconciliation, the parliamentarian has to rule whether there's actually a budgetary impact of some of the policy, and the parliamentarian can strip out some provisions, and so that'll be something to watch in the days ahead because the parliamentarian in the Senate plays an outsized role in a reconciliation bill. So it's a really good point.
Yeah. Well, more specifically, Marc, does the current policy baseline method of accounting that was used in the House that would totally change the way we're looking at pay-fors here survive the parliamentarian?
Well, I think the Senate feels like it does. I think the current baseline policy was actually something the Senate encouraged the House to go with because they felt it would pass the parliamentarian muster. And so actually the House did this at the direction of the Senate. So I think that John Thune and Chairman Crapo feel very confident that it will. It is a change, you're right. But I think that they've already, I think, soft sold this within the Senate and the parliamentarian to get permission to go this route.
Always a great inside view with Marc Short. Thank you, Marc, former chief of staff for Mike Pence. Great to have you with us.
Joe and Kayleigh, thanks for having me.
On Bloomberg. Yes, sir. This morning on Bloomberg, Republican Congressman Andy Barr of Kentucky weighed in on this and how the markets are responding to President Trump's tax bill.
Republicans are also watching the 30-year. We're watching the 10-year. We're watching instability in the bond market. We're looking at weakness in demand for treasuries. But blaming the big, beautiful bill for weakness in the Treasury market or instability in the Treasury market is like blaming the firefighter, the arsonist blaming the firefighter for the inferno.
This comes as new data released today show the U.S. labor market holding up despite concerns over President Trump's tariff war and instability in the bond market. Joining us with more on all of this is Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine, does the analysis from the congressman we heard earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio match with what investors are thinking?
Not really, and I'm a little confused by the analogy because, I mean, this is a bond market that has clearly reacted to what's been going on in Washington. In fact, strategists over at Citigroup just this morning were out with an interesting report saying that, look, there needs to be more of a premium to buy long-term U.S. debt, and they're putting a price tag on that of about 50 basis points. That's basically half a percentage point that would effectively take at least the 10-year rate up to around 5% and that 30-year rate to about 5.5%. And that really is the key concern right now for markets, is that if you are going to increase the deficit and increase spending and at the same time cut taxes, so basically taking in less revenue, then you're going to have to compensate investors for that. And that's one reason why you're seeing such tight trading action in the bond market, because they are really in wait-and-see mode. Now, I should point out, Joe, you did get some encouraging data today on the jobs front, and you saw that reflected in the rally in equities.
I also want to ask you within equities, Romaine, because we spend so much time on this program talking about the president's tariff policy, its fluctuations, the impact it will have on businesses. We saw a 15, almost 16 percentage point move to the upside on Dollar General, even in the face of tariffs today. What's going on with that?
Well, that was an interesting story because Dollar General also made it very clear that they're finding a way to mitigate some of the tariff impact. And we've seen a lot of companies actually say that. Now, they're being a little vague on exactly how they're doing that. But what we do know, at least for right now, Kayleigh, is they're not necessarily passing those costs on to the consumer. That's a good thing, and you're not seeing that in the hard data. I think it's a big part of the reason why you saw Dollar General up so much. It's a big part of the reason why you saw a lot of retailers rally so much. Now, that could change. This conversation we're having today might be different a month or 2 months from now, but for right now, you have an economy that at least on the surface is holding up. You saw that in the job openings data from April. We get a big jobs report on Friday that will show conditions in May, and at least based on earnings, Kayleigh, and you follow this stuff, Most of the companies out there have said that at least right now, our sales are still holding up, consumers are still coming in the store, and at least for right now, we're not having to raise prices materially on them.
For right now. All right, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, as always. And coming up, while President Trump is increasing the pressure on Senate Republicans, we'll look across the aisle with Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It'll be the largest increase in our debt ceiling in our history. And I think it's a mistake. There's no more pointing fingers at the Democrats and saying, oh, they're the big spenders. It'll be all on Republicans' shoulders. And I'm not going to be one of the Republicans who's going to be responsible for this debt.
I would like to see some reforms to Medicaid. It would require the reform of the state's loophole for me to support the Medicaid reforms.
We will not be able to pass the bill without finding some more spending cuts. We can do that without going after Medicaid benefits, but we ought to go after some of these schemes around the country where individual states are using Medicaid to pad their own state pocketbook.
Republican Senators Rand Paul, Cynthia Lummis, and Kevin Cramer sharing their thoughts on the House's tax bill now that it's in their hands, the pending revisions that it faces in the Senate. This as Senate Republicans battle out the details. Democrats remain united, as none are expected to support the legislation in its current form. To that end, we're joined now by a Senate Democrat on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota is with us live from Capitol Hill. And Senator, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. Welcome. The White House says that if this bill does not pass, allowing the Trump tax cuts to expire will mean a tax hike of about 22% for the average American. Is that how you're prepared to vote?
Well, that's nonsense, of course. Nobody wants to raise taxes on middle-class Americans, and Democrats are strongly opposed to that. But what's going on in this bill is that it's actually going to raise costs for regular families in this country, middle-class families, while the vast majority of the tax benefits are going to go to the very wealthiest Americans and big corporations. I mean, to give you an idea of that, if you're a family making $51,000 or less, your costs are going to go up. Your after-tax income is going to go down. But if you're in the top 0.1%, you're going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Democrats just think those are the wrong priorities and that that's not a very beautiful thing about this bill. That's why we're trying to stop it, doing everything we can to stop it.
Well, and certainly we've heard a lot from Democrats about the changes to Medicaid in particular. I just wonder, Senator, if you disagree with all of them. For example, should there be a conversation around stricter work requirements in order to be eligible for Medicaid benefits? Do you take issue with that, or is your issue primarily around things like the provider tax and the impact that could have on rural hospitals and the like?
Well, my primary issue with the cuts that they're proposing to Medicaid is that it's going to cut millions of people away from their health insurance. It's going to take health insurance away from millions of people. And that's not going to drive down costs, except in the short run. That's going to shift costs. That's going to shift costs to rural hospitals. And I've spoken to rural hospitals all across Minnesota who tell me that if these provisions go through, I've had one hospital tell me it's not a question of if we can keep our doors open. It's only a question of how long we're going to be able to keep our doors open, because these hospitals are already really struggling. And if their uncompensated care goes up, you know, the people who are showing up in emergency rooms without health insurance, if those costs go up and their ability to pay for that goes down, which is what would happen with this bill, they're in a heap of hurt. And that's not only hurting people who get their health insurance through Medicaid, it's hurting everybody in those communities.
So, you know, for our viewers and listeners listening to this conversation, Senator, they'd say, well, you're in the room. Maybe you can still affect this. Is there any way that you can get around the idea of making changes to the provider tax that could threaten nursing homes and rural hospitals, or you're out in the cold in these meetings?
Well, so, you know, I serve on the Finance Committee. That's the committee where these provisions should be debated and discussed. And ideally, we would come up with a bipartisan solution. Not everybody won't get everything that they want, but at least we'll have some sort of a meeting of the minds. But you know as well as I do, that's not the way this process works. This is a partisan bill. They will pass it with only Republican votes. And so I'm using all the power that I have to try to influence the outcome. But I, at the end of the day, know that they're not counting on my vote to get get this done. It's really going to be up to them to decide what impact it has on their constituents.
Well, they're not counting on the vote of Elon Musk either, Senator. He is not a United States Senator, as you yourself are. But I wonder if you find yourself actually agreeing with Mr. Musk this evening.
Well, you know, it's hard to say. There's so much that I think is so wrong about what Elon Musk has done, but he's absolutely right about this. This bill is going to drive up the federal debt and in unprecedented ways, upwards of $5 trillion if you count all of those tax credits, all those tax benefits going into place for the long term. And what's happening when you see that going on? You see already Moody's has downgraded the federal United States credit rating, first time in like 100 years that's happened. That's going to drive up costs for everybody, and it is just dramatically fiscally irresponsible. I heard at the beginning my colleague Rand Paul talking about how he can't vote it. He can't vote for this based on that provision alone. So I do think it's very dangerous to see that kind of debt increase.
Rand Paul is not alone. Talk to Ron Johnson, I'm sure, Josh Hawley. I could keep going on this list of Republican senators, many of whom had conversations with President Trump in the last 24 hours. But, Senator, when you back off this, you've been through a number of reconciliation processes before. The party says it's going to work this out. What are you actually hearing on Capitol Hill? What's your gut check on this passing by the 4th of July in your chamber?
Well, you know, I hear a lot of concerns from our Republican colleagues. And on the one hand, people saying that the cuts to Medicaid, for example, are just untenable and go way too far, are going to hurt their constituents. And on the other hand, saying that the cuts aren't enough and the deficit, the budget debt is going to be too high. So they clearly don't have a meeting of the minds yet. These senators, Republican senators, have an opportunity to do something different here. And I think it's going to be very hard for them to come together. But I don't underestimate the impact of Donald Trump when he calls in and he says, get in line. And so we're going to be watching really carefully. Many of us are trying to work with our Republican colleagues to find some sort of a better path forward. But I think they've got a tough row to hoe to get this all done by the 4th of July.
And Senator, finally, we mentioned your seat on the Finance Committee. You serve on the Agriculture Committee as well. What concerns you most about the changes that could be coming for the SNAP program if this legislation passes?
Last week, I was home in Minnesota visiting food shelves where the number of Minnesotans visiting food shelves has literally skyrocketed over the last year or two. People cannot afford to buy their groceries. And we're talking about working families who are, 2 or 3 jobs and they still can't afford their groceries. So these proposals to cut SNAP are very dangerous. And understand their plan, the Republican plan, is to shift a big chunk of those costs onto state budgets, which is going to be extremely difficult. How are states that are required to have a balanced budget ever going to figure out how to pay for, hundreds of millions of extra costs, as is the case in my home state of Minnesota? So I'm hearing a lot about this at home, and people don't like it.
All right, Senator, we appreciate your time joining us live from Capitol Hill this evening. Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. We appreciate it. And of course, Joe, as you referenced the senator's seat on the Finance Committee, the Democrats will not be the ones that are in the White House tomorrow meeting with President Trump on this bill.
Well, that is the point of reconciliation, although you still have to think with all these members in one building together, maybe every now and then they have a conversation across the aisle. But that is the point here. When you're trying to get around a filibuster, you have to keep it all in the family. And that remains the case in the Senate, just like it was in the House.
Yep. And in the Senate, keeping it in the family means you can afford to lose just 3 votes.
That's
and Senator Rand Paul is still contending there's at least 4 of them who are willing to make sure this bill doesn't pass unless changes are made. We'll continue to follow this story, but still ahead, we'll turn to NATO, which is asking European member states to expand ground-based air defense capabilities 5-fold. We'll discuss what this means for the alliance with retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are facing the most dangerous security environment in decades. Russia's war of aggression continues. Terrorist threats persist. We are not at war, but we are not at peace either. So we must continue to strengthen our deterrence and defense.
NATO Secretary General Marc Rutte yesterday stressing the importance of the alliance's strength amid global conflict. Now NATO is asking European member states to expand ground-based air defense capabilities 5-fold. to fill a key gap in response to the threat of Russian aggression. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power. Alongside Kayleigh Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew, and joining us with details is Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams. Nick, it's great to see you. How aspirational is this ask?
Well, I would say in terms of, it depends on your time frame.
Yeah.
Long term, I don't think it's super aspirational. I mean, I think it's something that could happen. European countries, for a variety of reasons, President Trump obviously wants to take credit, but I think the Ukraine war is the more pressing impetus, have shown a real increased willingness to boost defense spending and enhance their own capabilities and rely much less on the United States. So I think when Marc Rutte says they're going to do this, I think there's going to be that's a pretty strong signal, and he's also picking up from member states that there is a willingness to follow through.
Well, and how much of this, as you mentioned, the war in Ukraine, is also because Europe has given Ukraine a lot of air defense systems as part of its aid that continues to flow, and therefore has a lot of replenishing of its own stocks to do.
Well, that's true. I mean, the number of air defenses that have gone to Ukraine from all sides, I think, that have been relatively small. So I think this reflects a longer-term strategy that looks at the possibility of Russia as a much greater threat than it used to be prior to the Ukraine invasion. Once that happened, you started to really see concerns about the ultimate doomsday scenario, which was, of course, that Russian forces would march through Ukraine and on into Eastern Europe, potentially into Poland or back into the Baltic states or some other advance. So what you're seeing is, I think, a fundamental reorientation of how Europe sees the threat from Russia and is now starting to follow through and put strategic goals and ideas into place that are essentially going to change the entire security architecture of Europe for years to come. Whether this is also a destabilizing move in terms of Russia and what Russia will make of it is a whole other consequence that we still haven't gamed out yet.
All right, Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, thank you so much, as always. And for more, we turn now to retired four-star General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Europe. General, welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg. You obviously have been there. You know the speed with which this alliance is able to make investments like this. We're talking a 5-fold increase here. How quickly, realistically, in your mind, can that happen?
Several years from now.
Okay. And what exactly do they need to be investing in as we consider the way in which the war in Ukraine specifically has highlighted the nature of war itself changing, threats changing?
Well, first of all, I think they need to mobilize their manpower or human power. We need larger standing forces and reserve forces. They have to be equipped. There's a lot made about drones. Okay, fine, let's get some drones. But you still need the fundamentals of combat power. You need to be able to move, shoot, and communicate. NATO has been light on air defense because it counted on the United States Air Force to sweep the enemy from the skies. Well, that's not good enough. So these countries have invested in some Patriot air defense systems. Netherlands and Germany have sent some of these systems to Ukraine, but the biggest need is Patriot, the modern PAC-3 system. And that is not only for the launchers, but also for the missiles. And it's incumbent on the United States to encourage the production overseas of this technology. Get it into Europe. Let Europe produce it. Europe needs it now. Don't get it held up in the U.S. defense budget. Beyond that, electronic warfare, we're characteristically weak, and the Russians are characteristically strong. They can blow us off the air. We've got to be able to distribute intelligence, and that means you've got to still have communications. And then there's the whole matter of logistics. With Ukraine, it's a big front. It's 600 miles north-south, but give up on Ukraine, you're looking at like 4,000 miles north-south. It's enormous. And at any place, Russia could, let's say, launch an attack against the island of Gotland, close off the Baltic Sea, and then deal with the Baltics at their leisure.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this, General, because a lot of people who never carried the title Supreme Allied Commander Europe seem to think that we're on the precipice of a major shift in the way we're approaching modern warfare. bringing us back, of course, to this Ukrainian attack against Russia. President Zelensky talked about this Operation Spiderweb, the drone strike that went deep inside Russian territory, thousands of miles from the front line. Here's what he said.
Yeah, we talked about our operation inside Russia, which has seriously weakened their military. Operation Spiderweb showed that modern war really looks like and why it's so important to stay ahead with technology. All our joint investments in drone production, all our shared battlefield experience, everything we are doing together with our partners, it's making Europe stronger.
Why it's so important to stay ahead with technology. He referred to joint investments in drone production. To what extent should this hasten procurement reform at the Pentagon, General, and an investment in new platforms that could meet a moment like we're in?
I do think we have to change procurement procedures in the Pentagon. It's too slow. It's too many checks and balances to keep from making a mistake. The programs extend for 10 and 15 years. The software, by the time it gets fielded, is 10 years, 15 years out of date, like on the F-35. Yeah. So, yes, we have to change that. We also have to be able to bring in new systems. Now, we started doing this in the Iraq War with the G8O office to deal with improvised explosive devices. And with a close relationship with DARPA, we have the means to find the technology and we have the means to field it. But here's the tricky part. Do you want to field this year's technology right now for a threat 2 years from now? Or do you want to wait a year and get a newer technology? Let's take lasers. We know lasers are going to be very effective against drones, but they've got to be high powered because the drones will be protected against lasers in the next generation. So do you want to field early generation lasers or do you want to wait and make them better? These are the kinds of trade-offs that our leaders in the Pentagon have to consider when they're talking about investments, because we are not actually yet at war. Ukraine is. So do we size our force and invest for Ukraine's war, or do we prepare for the next generation of what's going to happen? The real challenge.
Well, Russia is at war with Ukraine as well, and its war machine to this point, General, has continued to roll on, even in the face of existing sanctions. We have heard from the White House now multiple times teasing the idea that President Trump is open to tightening sanctions, but we haven't seen it yet. How important would that be to actually starting to choke off the war machine?
I'd be surprised if it chokes off the war machine. China is committed to being with Russia. Iran doesn't have a future outside of Russia, and neither does North Korea. So these countries are going to put up with the economic hardship and continue to support Russia until the United States really puts its foot down. But sanctions are not really the way of putting the foot down. All the rhetoric, so I'm disappointed in Vlad, please stop, and all that stuff, that's for domestic consumption. What makes a difference in international affairs is action. That action is sanctions, number one, and additional armaments to Ukraine, number two. And number three, no more talk of redeploying forces out of Europe.
Well, just lastly, in our remaining moment, General, did Ukraine strengthen its hand with this attack when it comes to the next meeting at the negotiating table?
Certainly, but it mostly strengthened its hand with respect to the opinions of the elites in Europe and the United States that Ukraine's not a loser. Ukraine has, let's say, cards, and Ukraine is in this fight to win because it must win. Ukraine, if it loses, will be extinguished as a country. They know it. They're desperate. They're innovative. They're courageous. They deserve our support. And so it's not so much what's going to happen at the negotiations. It's the support they get. Putin's not going to give in until he sees that he can't win. When he sees that he's gone as far as he can go, he's going to lose if he keeps going, then you'll get progress at the negotiating table. But he hasn't seen that yet.
Great to have you back, General. Retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. On to another story we've been following here on Bloomberg throughout the day. Meta says it has reached a 20-year deal to purchase power from Constellation Energy's nuclear plant in Clinton, Illinois, all in an effort to keep up with the soaring demand for energy to power artificial intelligence.
The financial terms of the agreement, which begins in 2027, were not released. Under the deal, Constellation will make investments to boost output of the nuclear plant and consider a second unit. That consideration is already underway. This with nuclear power emerging as one of the biggest winners from the AI-fueled surge in electricity demand. And Jefferies analyst Brent Thill says it's only the beginning.
I think what this deal signifies is that we're at the beginning of this AI adoption curve. It's going to take, we're again, inning one, if you will, of a baseball analogy. And this is going to be a multi-decade transformation.
Last year, Microsoft announced a similar deal with Constellation's 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. Amazon and Alphabet also making investments in small-scale nuclear reactors. We'll continue to bring more details of this story as it develops. Coming up on Bloomberg, we'll turn back to the president's push for Senate Republicans to pass his tax package and the criticism the bill is now facing from Elon Musk when we assemble this evening's political panel.
But first, Jae-Myung has won South Korea's presidential election. And we'll get the details from Bloomberg's Shery on in a live report from Seoul. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew in Washington. But we turn now to South Korea, which officially has a new leader. Jae-Myung, a left-leaning former labor activist, has officially been declared president and begun his term after narrowly winning the country's election, vowing to improve people's livelihoods and avoid a recurrence of martial law. For more on the impact of the results on South Korea and beyond, we go now to Bloomberg's Shery, who is live in Seoul for us. And Shery, what else should we know about the new president and the way in which he's likely to approach relations with the United States specifically?
Kaylee, what a whirlwind election, right? I mean, this vote just happened yesterday. He's already certified as president. He's already become president just 20 minutes ago. His inauguration just happening in less than 5 hours. All of this, of course, given the constitutional crisis that this country has suffered. And Jae-Myung, a left-leaning politician, he's a survivor himself. We know that he grew up in poverty. He wants more wealth distribution, often compared to Bernie Sanders in that way. He's toned down his rhetoric a little bit in the past few months, but we do know that he has tried throughout his career to really better labor conditions for workers around South Korea. He himself worked at a necklace factory when he was only 12 years old. He became a human rights lawyer. Then he became governor of Gyeonggi province surrounding Seoul. He survived an assassination attempt just last year when he was stabbed in the neck. We know that he'll have a different approach when it comes to relations with Washington, when it comes to the trade deal that he wants to achieve with the Trump administration.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, Shery. The Trump White House has been engaged in trade talks with South Korea for weeks now. What does this mean for a potential deal to be in the offing in the weeks ahead?
After 6 months of a leadership vacuum in this country, finally there is more certainty about what policymakers can do going forward. Incoming President Jae-Myung, or President Jae-Myung, I should say, given that he's already going to take office in just a few hours, he has vowed to really maintain that strong alliance with the United States. But at the same time, he wants balanced ties with both China and Russia. Now, that will be a tricky challenge for any leader here in South Korea, especially when it comes to the imposition of export controls on advanced tech, for example. I mean, this is huge for South Korea's economy. 40% of GDP comes from exports for South Korea. Now, we have heard candidate Jae-Myung talking about not wanting a quick deal with the United States. He wants wants to really look into the details of what an agreement could look like. There could be also hurdles like the 30,000 troops stationed in South Korea. President Trump wants South Korea to bear more of the cost of hosting these troops. We know that Secretary Hegseth has come to Asia, talked about 5% of GDP defense spending from all Asian allies. South Korea is one of the leaders in spending in Asia, but it's still at around 2.6%. So we'll see how Jae-Myung goes ahead and balances this tricky relationship with this geopolitical backdrop.
Just moments after the new president was confirmed, Bloomberg's Shery on. We thank you so much, Shery, for the great reporting. On to the post on X now that has caused quite the stir on Capitol Hill. Yes, from Elon Musk, referring to President Trump's tax bill as a, quote, massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill, causing lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to react. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had this response earlier today.
I hear something happened while we were at lunch, which led me to make some news here today and say something I didn't think was imaginable. I agree with Elon Musk. Republicans should listen to him and actually to their former selves, outraged about the national debt. Because it's here, Donald Trump's big, ugly bill is in the Senate.
Joining us now for their reaction this evening's political panel, Jim Kessler, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, former RNC Communications Director. Great to have you both here. Sure, I want to know what this means for the future of the bill, but we've got a Schumer guy at the table here. And I'm very curious to know what your former boss is going to do with what I guess would be new wind in his sails. Does this change the outcome?
I don't know. I mean, look, this is the best deployment of Democratic talking points I've ever seen, and it was Elon Musk using them.
Yeah.
This bill is a debt bomb, okay? And on the Republican side, Ron Johnson, Republican Wisconsin senator, said that. Look, Donald Trump is going to pass some sort of reconciliation bill, probably something fairly close to what's moving right now. But this is an unpopular bill that's in trouble, and Elon Musk's timing is bad for this bill right now.
Well, and that would make it bad for President Trump, who was just in the Oval celebrating Elon Musk's accomplishments at Doge as he leaves his formal role in government. Just days later, out of Washington, he hits the wire with this, Lisa. We can consider the ramifications for the bill specifically, but what if there actually is a major falling out between President Trump and the richest man in the world? What would the implication of that be?
I believe that there probably already has been a falling out between the two of them. I believe that this is an example of Elon Musk perhaps trying to grab back the brass ring for himself and make himself a hero again. And I don't think that he has the chutzpah that I think the White House and the Republican leadership has. So I think that this is a great news day for the Senate leader on the Democrat side. I think that the rest of the Republicans will say it's unhelpful. They also have concerns about the bill, but I don't necessarily think it hurts the outcome. I think it makes Elon Musk look like he's got a little bit too little, too late.
Oh, how about that? It was a golden key, I think, not a brass ring he got in the Oval Office. But this has got to be seen as the ultimate betrayal by Donald Trump. Is that why they staged that news conference, so Trump could get ahead of his feelings going public, you think?
I don't think so. I mean, I just don't think the White House is reacting to Elon Musk the way that they are. I think that they already knew that he was someone that was probably walking away. It strikes me as a toddler slamming their fork on the high chair because they're unhappy with the way things have gone down. I think he looks as if he was moved along and out of the White House. I don't think that to me, this just seems like sour grapes.
Wow.
Well, it's not just Elon Musk, to our point, though, who is saying this, and not just Democrats agreeing with him either. You had Rand Paul reposting this. Others like Mike Lee, for example, saying Elon Musk has a point here. Does this give more ammunition to the voices who are telling the White House they are actually willing to vote this thing down if substantial changes aren't made?
And then you add the bond markets, and then you add the downgrade as well. And the momentum is on the side of sort of like the Freedom Caucus and the hardliners that want, frankly, a much harsher bill, okay? Well, the harsher this bill gets, the worse it is for the moderates and the worse it is for voters. I think one of the interesting things is Trump's response was muted, to Musk, and I think it's because he realizes Musk can put a lot of money behind Republicans who vote against this bill and help them in the midterms.
Yeah. We did hear from the Senate Majority Leader on this today. John Thune shared what he's hoping for when it comes to a floor vote on the tax bill after the X post from Elon Musk. Listen.
We obviously respect everything that Elon did with Doge. On this particular issue, we have a difference of opinion. And I think it's rooted in the fact that he's accepting the CBO assumptions that are built upon a static scoring assessment of the effect, the macroeconomic effect, growth effect, that these changes will have on our economy.
We don't have to get into the whole veracity of the CBO here. I'm just wondering if everyone still thinks this bill is going to pass. There's so much on the line. Republicans say they're together on this. It still becomes law, right?
Something passes. This sort of thing never not passes.
Yeah.
Like the disaster, and Democrats face this with Build Back Better, which shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and then eventually passed by. You have to pass something. I'm not exactly sure what is going to pass, but something's going to pass.
It also passed under a different name. This could come back in a different form and still be a reconciliation bill that extends the Trump tax cuts, right?
That's exactly right. And there's going to be changes that are going to come out of the Senate, and then they're going to take it back to a conference, and then they're going to decide on what the difference is. It's when it gets done, and it's looking like more and more it's going to be a fall resolution for all of this legislation. Wow. But certainly I do think that they will get something done because they have to. This is their job, and they have some work to do here. But it won't look like it looked when it arrived in the Senate.
Well, but hold on just a second. According to the Treasury Secretary, we can't wait for the fall to pass this particular legislation, which includes in it a hike to the debt ceiling. If they can't get this done in July, Jim, is that giving all the leverage to Democrats whose votes will be necessary to lift the debt ceiling separately?
Right, and they could have passed a separate reconciliation bill and put just the debt ceiling on it, and Republicans decided not to do it. They put all their eggs in this basket. Yes, there would be leverage for Democrats, and they would use it this time.
What did they get for that? What did Democrats ask for if Mike Johnson calls for help on the debt ceiling?
I mean, I don't know. To me, at that point, it's Donald Trump who really gets to eat it because he's the one who wanted this great big bill, and he didn't do what he was supposed to do on the debt ceiling. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they get. At that point, people are going to be so unhappy with each other, including Republicans and Democrats in their own conferences. Yeah. It would be impossible for me to realize what it would be that they'd ask for.
You wonder about a side deal, potentially. You know, Kayleigh, crank back the Medicaid cuts if you want the debt ceiling. Jim's nodding.
I think health care, if there was some sort of debt ceiling cliff, I think health care would be number one for Democrats. I think there would be cats and dogs about some of the Doge action as well.
Well, and that's timely considering a rescissions package was sent from the White House to the House, and they say they'll be acting on that in short order to the tune of about $9 billion, affecting NPR, CBS, and USAID. Jim Kessler and Lisa Camuso-Miller, our political panel this evening. Thank you both so much, as always, for joining us. And, of course, the OMB director, Russ Vought, Joe, is saying more of those rescission packages are coming.
That's right.
They're nowhere in scale to the kind of size of the big, beautiful bill, though, that we're talking about.
An attempt to codify the Doge. I wonder where the next rounds come from. But you can read a lot more about it in the Washington edition newsletter. Find it on the terminal and online.
And, of course, you can find us back here tomorrow for the Wednesday edition. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you then on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.